Let's move on and look at section B, which is the assessment of writing. Now, section B is worth 40 marks, therefore it's absolutely vital that students allow sufficient time to produce a developed and crafted piece of writing that will enable them to get the best possible mark they can for this section. Section B, questions 5 and 6 are testing different assessment objectives. You're now looking at AO5, which is about the quality of communication and organisation, and AO6, which is looking at vocabulary, sentence structure and accuracy. There are 24 marks available for AO5 and there are 16 marks available for AO6, and the final mark is a composite of the two. As with question 4, the mark scheme itself contains some indicative content, but I would suggest that with your students as well, that you look at the 5 levels of marks that are there for AO5 and AO6, and again look at that hierarchy of skills that you can see that are being looked for at each level. And once again, the questions 5 and 6 are often much longer answers that you have a view of where the answer is heading in terms of the quality of skills as you go along, and the marking process is one of refining and looking for evidence to support your final judgment. Also, at standardising, because there's a choice of questions, inevitably students will often tend to favour one rather than the other, and at the standardising meeting we will reflect that by looking at more of the responses for the most popular of the two questions, if that's a marked feature of that particular year. Another thing to say about the paper 1 writing is that, first of all, as we've said, there is a choice of questions, and also that one of the two questions will always include, as additional support for candidates, will also include 2 associated images, which are also there to try and stimulate some form of response from the candidates and to support them. And certainly in recent series, candidates have used the images quite heavily to construct their own writing. In addition, although we don't specify a text type, so students may write narrative, they may write personal reflection, and the mark scheme is flexible enough and markers are trained to accommodate whatever text type students may write. We also always make the point of saying that what students write can be real or imaginary, and that's a feature of both of the two questions. Okay, shall we have a look at question 5. So question 5 asks, look at the images provided, write about a time when you went on a journey. Your response could be real or imagined. You may wish to base your response on one of the images. Okay, the other feature of the questions is that there will be a broad thematic link back to the passage selected in section A. So what we hope to do is to capitalise on the fact that students have been thinking in a certain way, possibly thinking about their own experiences, and therefore as they come to section B, they're able to use those to then construct their own writing. So in terms of that popularity of these two questions that were taken, question 6 is the more popular, so we have 2 question 5 student responses for us to look at and 3 of question 6. So let's have a look at question 5, script 1. This answer begins, it's Wednesday. I know that this appears to be a useless and necessary fact, an insignificant detail, but it isn't. I chose Wednesday. You can see already that this answer begins crafting its response from the very beginning. The use of that short, abrupt sentence to engage interest, the beginnings of the creation of a very knowing tone, which creates a certain sense of mystery about this, and that's sustained throughout this answer. The central nature of the day is pleasing, balanced, ordered. Wednesdays are good days to get things done. We've already got some beginnings of development vocabulary, unnecessary, insignificant, and that will that will increase quite markedly if you want to keep a view on the quality of and the range of vocabulary. This is a candidate who knows that they can use simple language when simple language is what's effective, but that they have in their repertoire a much wider range of vocabulary which they use with discrimination. Look at the narrative hook as we reach the end of paragraph 1. We both agreed on that. Now, as readers, we have no idea who's being referred to here. This is an answer that reveals things slowly, and it's being done very deliberately as an engagement mechanism. It's sunny too, a sense of development. Okay, the forecasters said it would be, but you can't believe the Weather Channel, can you? Notice the deliberate use of that chatty register chosen specifically, and you'll understand why as we go through. You told me good weather equals a good sign. You told me the sun wanted me to make this journey and was smart. Now this movement from into second person again is deliberately done to create variety, it creates interest, and it creates engagement. So we're at 2 paragraphs in, but the student's already demonstrating a wide range of skills. What utter rot? Short sentence, exclamatory, use of exclamation mark, a range of punctuation. Nothing smiles down on me, not even my own reflection, which is an unusual image we'll come back to. Enough. Short sentence for effect, single word. That's not the path I need to go down today. There's another waiting for me. Now, notice how at this point the narrative changes. The ability to sustain this form of internal psychological narrative is interesting, but it now changes. Walking slowly to the window, I look outside. Also notice the way that we have the subordinate clause which foregrounds the active verb, so this answer picks up pace at this point and becomes much more active. We have the description of the man, the garish man, the jogger outside. Again, now start looking for this quality of expression, deliciously reckless. The man's described as gleaming like a beacon of liberty. And what we have slowly emerging is the sense of the speaker here being someone who is confined by their condition in their house and looks outside and sees examples of freedom. But the quality of that expression, I think, is particularly strong. Okay. Also, at the end of that paragraph, just notice the deliberate. In fact, you can see the way that this writer has gone back and changed. You can see some of the crossings out, that they've changed the use of the capital F for fear. So I make it halfway down the stairs before fear even realizes I've left my room, which suggests a degree of personification taking place. The final 7 steps are torturous. Fear and anxiety, 2 old companions who've long plagued my mind. This lovely move into metaphorical language. One of the things about this answer is that it doesn't strain for effect. The effects come very naturally. It has a very mature style. Okay, and if you just want to look, some of the vocabulary around footfall, the use of alliteration at the end with the blackness threatens to blot him out. Okay, next paragraph, panting, sweating, shaking. So we have this triple repetition, powerful, emotive, active language to describe the extent of the effort that it's taking our writer to make it what we would think as a very insignificant distance down the hallway. Again, the writer moves to us in this paragraph and addresses us back again through the second person. And we get that little moment at the end. It reminds me to ground my feet, reminds me I'm strong. Ha! As if I would ever say that about the pathetic excuse for a human being that carries my... And the candidate even interrupts themselves, the student interrupts themselves to say, no, that's not the path I'm going down today. Another path awaits me. And what you're beginning to realise is that the terminology around path here is a metaphorical as well as a literal path. This writer is actually trying to get outside and make it down the garden path, make it outside So there's a sense of agoraphobia here, but it's also about a path in life. It's a much broader symbol. There's so much to draw attention to here that, you know, I won't draw all of it. You've got some use of imagery about the champion weightlifter in the next paragraph. You've got the triple repetition in the next paragraph about sometimes, usually it beats me back, but today is Wednesday. Today is sunny. Today I have another path to walk around. So you've got this developing sense of textual cohesion here in the sense of the linking metaphor of the path. Also, if you remember back to the opening, the choice of Wednesday for the writer is very important. And this writer doesn't forget that. And it brings it back in here because it links this text together. Okay, I'm going to move you on towards the end. As I say, the quality of the way that this sustains with simile, with variety of vocabulary, the infinite number of seconds of dragged by is particularly impressive. In terms of the narrative, yes, the student does finally get out into the sunshine. If you look at the paragraph at the bottom of the penultimate page, my left foot, independent of my brain, throws itself into the sunshine it hasn't felt in 3 years. So we noted earlier on the use of short sentences for effect. This candidate has a perfect facility with complex sentences, embedded clauses, and the more extended vocabulary we can see there. Where does this one finish? I'm going to move you towards the end. Where do we get to? We get the narrative comes full circle. That, yes, the writer manages 11 steps outside. This top paragraph on the final page, I repeat it so I remember the number, 11 steps outside, and that's a repetition. So again, we're back to short, simple, emphatic sentences, ones that sum up the extent of achievement that those 11 steps represent. The orange man runs past my gate and nods a simple greeting. My head nods back. Again, this student can move very easily between complex structure, complex language, simple structure, simple language. And at all times, it's about creating the reader response. So, where do we come back to? Notice the way that we come to shorter paragraphs as we get to the end. For a few moments, my hand on the gate, silently pleading for me to let them go further, but fear has already come to take me back inside. And there's this wonderfully sinister sense of the personification of fear and earlier on anxiety. But there's the sense of achievement as well. I don't care because I've been warmed by the sun. And this final paragraph of today is Wednesday. Now, if you want to go back and just read that opening paragraph, you'll see the way that this candidate crafts that textual cohesion, that we return full circle. But now, as readers, we understand the psychological importance of Wednesdays and today I walked outside. This is progress, and that short 3-word emphatic sentence is a particularly strong finale. So as I say, this answer really does far more than is needed. If you want to look at the mark scheme for AO5, you're looking at one that shapes an audience response with subtlety, which it clearly does. There is a sophisticated and sustained use of tone and a variety of tone. I say at times it creates a sinister mystery, at times it creates exultation, at times it creates action and activity, that it manipulates complex ideas. Yes, the reader is left to fill in the gaps in terms of what it is that our writer is actually suffering from and why this is such a challenge for them. And never actually says what that condition is, but there are complex ideas here about liberty and freedom and movement. So it very easily gets a top level 5 mark for AO5. And in terms of AO6, where we're looking at an extensive vocabulary used strategically, spelling errors are almost non-existent here. It punctuates with accuracy. We have a variety of punctuation. We have a wide variety of sentence structure used throughout. And this one very easily achieves the top level 5 mark for AO6, which is a mark of 16. Let's move on and look at question 5, script 2. I walked to the doors of the plane. Babies crying from the people rushing about in the most confined area. The sound waves of their screams could be heard from the end of the aircraft. I hustled through the tight corridors until I finally got to the cabin crew at the doors, wishing me a nice trip, though they couldn't care less. What we can see here is a candidate who's trying to select material for effect, and we can also recognise that that's not wholly successful. Elements of that are, but if you want to look at the mark scheme in terms of level 4 about organising material for effect, effective use of tone and style, we haven't got that here. We've got someone trying to create this sense of hustle and bustle, but the quality of punctuation and sentence structure isn't allowing them to fully do that. Okay, the cabin crew wishing me a nice trip even though they couldn't care less. Now that's a distraction from the tone. This candidate, the student's trying to select the material to create this tone, but that throwaway remark about the cabin crew being insincere really isn't part of it, and it doesn't help to build. Okay, my parents were still reaching for the hand luggage in the overhead compartment, trying not to knock anyone out. End of the first paragraph. So we've managed to set a scene. We've got a relatively accurate spelling with the exception of hustled. We've got an attempt. We can see what this writer is trying to do, which tends to sort of place it above that level 1 into level 2 and level 3, but the quality of it isn't always there. I stepped onto the metal stairs with the feeling of the heat slapping me right in the face, and here's a good example. Yes, it does select the right material, the moment of trying to create the experience of stepping off the plane into the heat, and yet it lacks the range of vocabulary that would have improved that expression. As I walked down, I could already hear my parents shouting at the top of the stairs. We've only been here for 2 minutes and they were already at it. And that mixed tense that we can see going on there. But I carried on walking and ignored them. They wouldn't be ruining my holiday again. So this writer's building up a sense of expectation. We can see they're setting the scene for what this piece of writing is going to be about. This is the journey, obviously the holiday. And that within that we've got, as I say, some reasonable vocabulary and some reasonable levels of accuracy. Soon enough, we were all travelling in the taxi. Now, we've got some of these temporal markers here which help to move the story on. We've got another one further on as they opening the window in the hotel room. So keep an eye on some of these features at the start of the paragraph. We were all travelling in the taxi, heading to our hotel. They'd been arguing all day, so I just plugged in my ears with headphones and began listening, misspelt, to the music pounding in my ears. I rested my head on the window and looked out at the beautiful palm trees swaying in the wind. And I don't know if you can see from my copy the way that at that point I've bracketed that in to say yes. Now this is a much more expressive use of vocabulary. This is very clearly trying to create that sense of the idyll, and that for this candidate it's a clear improvement on where we've been before. So in terms of that overall looking at levels, we're looking somewhere, this is a sort of mid-range response. As a marker, I'm probably looking to see whether it sustains level 3, whether it should improve and cross that border, whether it deteriorates down into level 2. It's clearly better than a basic response in terms of audience and purpose, because it's clearly trying to craft a certain sort of reader response, and it's doing that deliberately, and it's choosing vocabulary for that, and it's doing it with a sense of accuracy. So this is your level 3 quality that we can see coming through. Okay, I'd always had a fascination for nature. Now, leaving aside the spelling, again, we've got a more developed vocabulary at play here. It's just so peaceful. As a child, my father would always take me to and this use of reminiscence. So whereas this was a shaky level 3 perhaps to start with, actually it becomes a much more secure level 3 as it goes on, and we can see why in some of those features. And also look at the end of that paragraph after the reminiscence of the lovely time spent with her father and the peace of nature, but now all we do is argue. And it's a very deliberate, abrupt, shorter sentence for effect, and this writer knows that's what they're doing. From a distance I could see the hotel. It looked amazing. Here is a writer who could do with a more extended vocabulary in order to try and just capture the extent of their thoughts and feelings about the hotel. We pulled up at the door. I hopped straight out, missing word of the car, to the lobby. Ladies misspelled, waiting, wearing bright red lipstick, offered me orange juice and a cold towel, which I politely declined. And again, in the midst of this relatively straightforward commentary by the student, we get this much more polished expression there. My parents sorted out the room whilst, do look at that connective, I pondered around the gift shop. Now, pondered is the wrong word. We can see the candidate looking for that effect, but in this case, not doing it effectively. And all the little souvenirs. It's worth saying in terms of vocabulary and spelling, I would much rather see students trying to use a more ambitious vocabulary, even if there are some issues around spelling, rather than limiting the range of vocabulary just because of the sake of accuracy. My mum called me, so then we walked up to the room with a man dragging our suitcases. My mum flashed the key card in the door. I mean, in terms of, if you look at AO5, AO5 is about organising information and ideas. There's a very clear sense of organisation here. We know exactly where we're up to in this story in terms of the arrival and her going to the shop and then back to... At no point as a reader are we unsure, and you will find lower down in levels 1 and 2 that very often as a reader you're not sure about where you are in terms of the order of a narrative. Where do we get to? My mum flashed the key card on the door. See, use of a more interesting vocabulary there. Flashed, and I ran in. It was amazing. Short sentence for effect. Use of punctuation. We also note that it's the same word that the student used before when they were trying to explain how impressive something was. As a feature we've noticed, and another 4 lines further down you're going to find that this student uses the same word again in order to try and sum up something. So the bathroom, tiles, a fridge, a massive bed for me. Then I walked to the window. Again, we've got this sense of, this narrative structure, these markers here. What do they see at the window? An amazing view of the resort, kids running around, adults drinking. And then we finally come to the summative sentence, which is, I knew this was going to be a good holiday. And so, again, it deliberately crafts that end for the reader in the sense that we're looking ahead. It's built a sense of expectation, even though her parents may be arguing that this is looking ahead. So in terms of marks, where do we come to? As we said, this is a level 3, that it does select material. There are rhetorical devices in there, a variety. We've got the short sentences for effect, we've got the palm trees, we've got the attempt at creating the hustle and bustle of the arrival on the plane. It does connect that information well for us, actually. The connections in this are strong. So in terms of where it is in level 3, it's towards the top end of level 3. And the final mark for that was a mark of 14. In terms of AO6, what we have is, as we can see, that balance, and it will always be a best fit judgment that we have a balance here, that there is a varied vocabulary. It doesn't reach level 4. This is not wide and selective. We can see that continual repetition of the same word, but there's enough variety in there for level 3. However, there's some spelling issues for this student, which means that rather than the top of level 3, this is given a mid-level 3 mark of 8. So it was 14 for AO5 and a mark of 8 for AO6. Question 6 uses the same assessment objectives as question 5, and therefore there's no need to go back over those. So in terms of this particular paper, this was the more popular of the two questions. Question 6 itself asks, write about a time when you or someone that you know experienced any form of conflict. And as we said before, as a feature of all of the questions, your response could be real or imaginary. Let's look at script 1, question 6. Now, again, as we did with question 5, schools frequently ask to see strong examples of writing text, and this is one that secures full marks for AO5 and for AO6, and we'll have a look at why that is. Let's just read the opening together and we'll comment on that. So, burning thick heat was all she could feel upon her scalp. The crackling of her hair as it was torn from her head resembled that of a fire, the flames licking around her face as she was forcefully dragged down the cold cement steps. I mean, what you have to say is that if you've taught your students about in media res, here it is in action. This writer feels no need to set the scene, introduce characters. We drop straight into the middle of powerful, violent action. If you look at the use of vocabulary, the use of the adjectives about forcefully dragged, this is how that powerful writing is being created. And that we have the use of the imagery of the flames licking around her face. That use of imagery picked up almost ironically at the beginning of the next passage. So the first paragraph finishes there, I think, for deliberate effect. Now, if you remember back to question 5, we said one of the features of those better quality answers is the way the writer deliberately crafts the reader response, and we can see this happening here. Pain wrapped around her body like a blanket, each step leaving a bruise worse than the last. And that ironic reversal of a blanket usually is something that offers comfort, here being something, in this case, that offers pain, I think is very deliberately being done by this writer. Again, in terms of what we know as readers, this is very deliberately done, that we don't know the setting, we don't know the circumstances, but this writer is going to slowly reveal some of that to us. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen her body. So again, we get a moment here, as we did with some previous ones, of looking back. It's a common feature of writers, especially if you begin in media res, is that to fill some of that background in, that you make use of memory. The short paragraph of her once sapphire blue eyes stared up at him, fixed and without light. And then the next paragraph, he stood for a moment. Here's a sense of development now. We've introduced another character, a male character into the story. So we now have two characters. We don't know the relationship between them, but like we said with script 1 on question 5, the way that good writers very often leave the reader to fill the gaps in between them. And that's what's happening here, that we're assuming that this person may be responsible for what's taking place. Notice the use of emotive language. She longed for him to regard her, guilt, pity, but she was met with nothing but malice. And notice the strength of that final word. The next paragraph demonstrates another range of skills. If you look at the use of repetition, simple repetition for powerful effect. She was powerless and torn between loving him or hating him, torn between wanting him or wanting to live. And those use of balanced short sentences with that use of repetition is very effective. Now, just look at the way this candidate moves from those short, simple sentences to the next paragraph, which really is a tour de force of complex sentence control and the use of embedded clauses. Just have a look, and vocabulary to go with that. An inexpressible pang tore through her abdomen. It's the next sentence. She collapsed to the floor, heaving. Her lungs felt as if they were flooding, the space for air becoming smaller and smaller as she gasped, desperate for even the smallest molecule of air to squeeze through the contracting muscle. And actually, it creates a breathless quality itself by the use of punctuation and the dramatic pause at the end as we finish the paragraph there. again, we still don't know the circumstances. If you look in the next paragraph, you'll see that juxtaposition, that reversal we saw with the use of the pain and the blanket, where she's lying against the icy stone as the pain burns through her. This writer makes particularly useful, a particular use of those dualities of language there. A cynical chuckle briefly filled her ears, but she was too focused on the sharp knives of pain. Tears began streaming down her face. Again, I won't give you all of it. You can see one of the things that this does have is that it has an internal psychological realism that we begin to understand how this character within the writing feels. And if we look towards the middle and the end of here, as we can see, as he shuffles closer, brushing her matted and greasy hair behind her ear before whispering, and we're expecting him to whisper something violent and abusive, and we're taken by surprise when he whispers, "I'm so sorry, my love." And that very simple language, and I say, one of the features of better writers is their ability, that repertoire we spoke of the ability to use complex structures, complex vocabulary when needed, but also to use simple language, and here monosyllabic, simple everyday language, and that the simple two-word paragraph that stands starkly alone. This student is using layout for effect as well, very clearly. So you have this strong, emotive, powerful, shocking, I think, response at this point. Such simple words stirred the conflict in her once again. My love. And we repeat the words, we repeat the layout. That's all he had to say for her to fall so helplessly in love. And we've had a triple repetition within a paragraph. I think it's quite rare to have a triple repetition of 3 separate paragraphs, but we get it here, and this is being done very deliberately for effect. In terms of referring to the mark scheme, we did before that this is very clearly this top end of level 5. There it was. The ache and longing crept back into her lifeless heart, making it beat strongly for him again. And again, we've got this juxtaposition of opposites, the lifeless heart which beats strongly. In essence, this is a love-hate relationship, one of abuse and love. She hated him because she still loved him. She hated herself for it too. And that returned to very simple, very direct language at the end. If you want to look at the mark scheme, as we said, the top of level 5 is about an extensive vocab. Sorry, let's look at AO5. Top of AO5 is a piece of writing that shapes the audience response with subtlety and sophisticated use of tone. This very clearly does that in a variety of ways. We get the moments of shock, we get the moments of horror almost, we get the internal psychological insight into her feelings of love for him. It does manipulate complex ideas. This is psychologically a very complex piece of writing. And in terms of AO6, there is an extensive vocabulary at use. There's a wide range of sentence structures, short, complex, a variety of punctuation. As we said with script 1 on question 5, this answer does more than it needs to do to get the top marks for AO5 and AO6, but it is a very strong example of what good writers can do given the opportunity. Let's move on to script 2, shall we? Okay, script 2 comes down a little in terms of the mark scheme. This is one that scores at level 4 for AO5. Let's use this as a comparison too. Script 2 begins with a simple identification of scene. Each tour lasts 6 months and mine was nearly over. There's a deliberate attempt there to engage, say, by dropping us into what we don't actually know at the moment of where this scene is set. It's deliberately simple vocabulary. I'd been in Iraq for 5 months and 3 weeks exactly. Every day I counted how long I had left until I could go home to my mum's cooking. I couldn't last on the standard rations we were given for much longer. So it very quickly does establish a sense of character, a sense of scene, and a sense of expectation. My taste buds were numb to the taste of rice and chicken with solid fruit bars. I'm sure they were out of date. And we've seen this before, where writers sometimes give us something sort of trivial that doesn't quite seem to add to the tone that they are trying to create. But this is an effective opening in terms of scene, character, building expectations. So I gave this last patrol my everything. Notice the short paragraph. This is a setup paragraph. This is the beginning of the narrative hook. Quite clearly, we now have an expectation about something happening on the last patrol. We were formed in staggered file, walking through one of the towns. Every step I took was a risk. Now we're starting to create atmosphere. The sense of earlier boredom and food is now being replaced by a growing sense of danger about this final patrol. There could have been, every step I took was a risk. There could be detonators, the spelling as we go past, or IEDs hidden anywhere. Deliberate use of punctuation. To ensure this did not happen every time, just look at the use of sentence structure there. Every time my foot went to take pace, I did this. Sweep gently over the floor to make sure I couldn't feel anything, and then place my foot down, the outside first, and then roll my foot down until it fully contacted the floor. Now, what we have here is use of semicolon, relatively complex sentence, and this increasing attempt to build a sense of tension. The whole process was monotonous and seemed unnecessary, but I did it anyway. Let's get this growing use of vocabulary around monotonous and unnecessary. Spelling, quite clearly not as strong as we would expect for a higher level mark. Around me were buildings. That's what I need to say is, at this point, this answer is very much in the middling. This is very much in this level 3 AO5 territory around. There is selected material, there's some use of rhetorical devices. It's developing and connecting the information in terms of the clarity of communication, but in comparison to script 1, for example, we haven't got that sense of ambition. We haven't got that sense of developing understanding that comes through manipulation of sentence structure and vocabulary, but we're about to see an improvement in this answer. Around me were buildings that had been stripped naked of all character and colour, which is an improvement. The town, which I assumed had once been full of life, was now desolate and abandoned. Notice the use of the embedded clause, notice the use of the more varied vocabulary, desolate, abandoned. The windows were covered with what looked like odd bits of rag to keep out, and the air had a distinctive smell of recent gunfire. This appeal to varied senses. It is worth talking to students about the use of a range of senses. Inevitably, most students will tend to opt for the sense of sight as the main one. However, you do add a richness to your writing if you make reference to other senses, such as the distinctive smell of recent gunfire, because it helps to build in the reader a sense of scene and place. So, as we said, this had been in that mid-level 3. This is moving towards, we know that it finishes just over that line into level 4, and if you're wondering why, you can see it taking place now in the writing. Out of nowhere, now look at the paragraph opening here, deliberately done to create tension. Out of nowhere, the sergeant raised his hand suddenly and signalled for us to take a knee. Obviously a technical term meaning to just pause and to wait. This meant bad news. No one halts a patrol unless something's gone wrong, ever. And that use of single word for an emphatic end to that sentence is being done deliberately to create that tension. My heart dropped and I stopped breathing. My mind started spinning. You can see this very deliberate use of a range of vocabulary. Stop breathing, mind spinning. That this writer is now trying to craft what we had expected would happen, that something is going to happen on the patrol. My mind started spinning. What if it was an IED? We've not seen this before from this student, that we've now got the use of rhetorical questions as a deliberate sentence device to further engage interest and to raise a sense of tension. What if it was a grenade? What if I didn't make it home? I was only 19 and I'd never felt so far away from home as I did then. And that very simple, emotive paragraph following on from the previous rhetorical questions. Excuse me. In those few minutes when the patrol took a knee, it was like my brain was having its own war of emotional conflict. It's interesting to say, I think we can see here a student who's using the passage from paragraph 1 about the internal conflict within that character in their own writing here, which is absolutely fine. It's a good feature. I wanted to get home as quickly as possible and never return to this hellhole. Simple use of adverbs to move us on. Another reference to the food. But at the same time, I wanted to stay here, finish what we'd started, do some good in the world. And these use of imperative sentences. I say the range of sentence structure from this writer improves as we go through. We just passed the previous paragraph, the one that ends with that very simply emotive, I wanted to cry. So we're moving towards the finale here. Although I knew I could do neither of those things, I had to stay put and wait for my orders. Only a week left, I kept reminding myself. I've been counting every day. And if you remember the opening paragraph where this writer sets the scene of themselves, their time in Iraq, their coming to the end of their tour of duty, already I'd served 5 months and 3 weeks in Iraq, and each tour only lasted 6 months. I was nearly done. So there's a very deliberate cyclical structure being used by this writer, that it creates that sense of textual cohesion, not at as sophisticated a level as we've seen with some others, but you won't find that ability to structure a whole piece of writing to create cohesion is something that you need to work with students to develop. Some of the sentence structure and vocabulary is not as sophisticated as developed, but this does enough in terms of the mark scheme, if you look, to move us from where we were in level 3 into level 4, that this clearly does organise the material for particular effect. We've got some of that emotive language, I wanted to cry. We've got the creation of tension, that the structure here about things being used cohesively, well, the whole textual structure itself is being used cohesively, and this was given a mark of 19 level 4 for AO5 in terms of sentence structure, accuracy, vocabulary. As we can see, it does use a wide and selective vocabulary. It does use simple vocabulary at times when it needs to. There are some issues about spelling, so it's not as high in level 4 for AO6, and it was given a mark of 10 for AO6. Let's move on and look at our last script in question 6, which is script 3. Script 3 is one that's been given AO5 and AO6 mark that places it in level 3, so that means we've exemplified levels 3, 4 and 5 for you. Just as we start, it's maybe worth, if you look at this script, you can see that the handwriting here is completely legible but very small. I will do my best as I read. It's worth for students to know that the exam board will go to great lengths in order to try and decipher what students have written. Most student answers are marked on screen, therefore we'll use that magnification facility to see that. But students do need to know that at the end of the day, that scripts that are illegible, that quite simply we cannot make out what's been written, and therefore we can't award marks for that. So students do need to make sure that their writing is legible at all times. Okay, let's have a look at script 3. Now, script 3 has an engaging opening. She wasn't my favourite person and I wasn't hers, but we were friends. Our friendship was intense in a way of strong hatred and jealousy. Every time we spoke, I heard the fakeness in her voice and saw it on her face. Every time I said something, she'd look at others and smile as if I'd said something that seemed to be weird. Now, what you can see, again, we have, if you look at the mark scheme, you're very clearly, those levels 1 and 2 marks, even from the very beginning, you're unlikely to find that that's where this answer is heading, that it's already using some elements of style and rhetorical device. We've got the every time, everybody repetition. We've also got the beginnings of a lack of sentence control in terms of comma splicing, and it's one that's worth noticing on this answer as we go through, that comma splicing, that use of commas rather than punctuation or other full stops or other punctuation, is a feature of this one. And on the second line, that capital, that what should have been a capital I being a lowercase, which at this stage I've circled, but whether that's just a passing mistake or whether actually that is a feature of this student writing as a marker is something I'm just going to bear in mind as I go through, because that is about accuracy. So we've got some use of more elaborate vocabulary with jealousy. We've got some more simple vocabulary with weird. So we pick that one up there. Every time I satisfied my teachers with my hard school work and grades, I could see the unpleasantness and disappointment in her eyes. I couldn't take it anymore. Again, there's the use of short sentence to pull the reader up short for effect. I wanted to confront her. Really, I did, I think that is. But someone else have done the job for me. Our mutual friend, comma, which should be a full stop. When I thought I could talk to her about anything, she made the truth crystal clear. Note the spelling as we go past. I couldn't trust her either. Besides, she was never on my side. So what we're seeing here is, if you say, a broadly level 3 style of writing at this stage. It is selecting material for effect. It is developing our understanding. It's presenting information about the relationship. It does have some elements of accuracy, which we're going to see how they develop as we go through. But it all has also, in terms of a narrative trajectory, it has also set us up for I wonder what will happen next. So this writer is very deliberately doing that for us, and essentially 2 main characters, the writer and the other girl. When she finally knew my thoughts and opinions, she was the one who confronted me. I know the stuff you've been saying about me, she spoke, pinning her eyes on me. I couldn't look at her, not because I felt guilty, which I didn't, but because I can never look at someone while talking to them. What are you talking about? I replied to her. So the fact this writer has chosen to use dialogue, which introduces a sense of immediacy and engagement, is a feature that we should credit. Within that, it's not the most deep and insightful dialogue. What are you talking about is a relatively simple dialogue. Also, we note the use of the punctuation and the comma splicing as we go through. I'll move us on. For the next year, my life had become tragic. I lost all my friends because of her. I couldn't sleep because of her. I wanted to leave school because of her. exclamation mark. Again, we've not seen that. With script 2 we saw this, didn't we, that sometimes candidates get to certain techniques as they go through, and here we have deliberate use of repetition, deliberate use of exclamation, and it's being done for effect. Our hate towards each other grew day and night. Even if we didn't talk, we were forced to see one another. I'm not sure why she acted the way she did before anything happened. Sooner or later, she spread lies and rumours about me that were really inappropriate. So, I think what we would be looking for if this was going to move further into level 4 would be about the particular effect, the more effective use of tone. This one in many ways has a very straightforward tone for something that actually, with that level of pain, perhaps ought to have been presented in a different way. And I say, we see that as we go through. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. If we move towards the end and we can see how this one develops, I try to ignore the final paragraph. Now she thinks we're friends. Use of ellipsis. So quite clearly implying that the writer doesn't think this is unfinished business, that the writer doesn't think they're friends. I don't want to go through what I went through last year. I have a better life now, and if I want to save it, I have to play along and to be her friend so she wouldn't ruin my life again. I wouldn't be as strong enough to carry on. Notice the comma splicing again, but also notice the deliberately emphatic but relatively straightforward plain tone. So we have a piece of writing that does communicate clearly and effectively. It's as a reader, you understand where you are within the narrative. It's a relatively simple narrative. It does select certain techniques at times for effect. There are some errors in terms of expression, errors in terms of accuracy and punctuation, but the overall mark, therefore, in terms of AO5, it was given 14 for level 3. The development and connection of information, as we said, is good. The selection of the material and those rhetorical devices. And for AO6, it was given a mark of 9, which places it at the top of level 3, that there is some varied vocabulary. The spelling of words generally inappropriate and so on is generally good. There is some sentence and punctuation variety, the use of ellipsis, the use of exclamation marks, the use of paragraphing for effect. And so that one was given a solid level 3 mark. That brings us to the end of paper 1. I hope you found that useful. I hope it's enabled you to see a range of real student answers done in real timed exam conditions, and that it gives you an insight into how we standardise and we mark so that you can use the same when you're working with your own students. Thank you very much.